Episode 1 of The Agency begins in England with our protagonist Martian leaving an airfield and ringing back to base. He's just left Ethiopia, where he's been working undercover to glean information from an, as yet, unnamed target. Now, part of this separation includes telling his current affair partner, Samir Zahid, that he's leaving for Jordan to teach. He lays it on thick that he's pathetic and directionless before kissing goodbye. He claims to his handler, Naomi, that they didn't get physical or intimate, but brief flashes to their last night together leads us to believe that they absolutely did. For now though, Martian has a job to do. After spending a while in a safe house in Jordan, he's back in London. His apartment is completely bugged though, and in silence he burns the business card he has with a note written from Samir on. The Martian is seen reunited with his daughter. Through her we gain more information over exactly what Martian's role is in this show, and what he does for a job obviously. He's a man that's used to get information and identify relevant people. He's been gone for 6 years, over in Ethiopia with this other life, and things are rather estranged with his daughter as a result. Now in Belarus, a car chase ensues through the streets before the manic driver is caught. This is agent named Coyote, who's over in Minsk. The agency in London pick up on this and the place is abuzz given how prolific this agent is. Henry is the one overseeing everything here, and he's reprimanded by the authorities over the handling of the Belarus situation. Now while he peddles the story that there's nothing special going on with the case, in reality there's a lot happening. Henry's subordinate Frank checks over the training tapes for Coyote and notices that some of them are corrupted. Even worse, there's no backup here either. The only thing we glean from this footage is that Coyote is vehemently against drinking, so he didn't undergo the usual training. For now, Henry shows up to see Martian and it seems something is brewing. The Russians are certainly up to something, and Martian has noticed their embassy now has 30 satellite dishes up on the rooftop. Henry believes the Cold War is back and his drama in Belarus has called for drastic measures. Martian is needed back in the field and he's going to be joined by a promising new agent whom he needs to oversee, Daniela Rui Murata. Before we get there though, Martian returns to the office and smiles thinly through the applause and warm welcome from everyone. However, news breaking of an explosion over in Khartoum sends him reeling, because this happens to be where Samir is posted. Unfortunately, this isn't helped by a message from Samir on his old email address telling him that she's not over him. Now through Daniela we get a glimpse of exactly how life is going to operate within the agency as one of these agents. Martian drives a hard bargain when he meets her, and he works hard to get intel from individuals in the bar as a test. It's a simple mission no doubt, but a lesson to reinforce that she needs to rely on herself, not the mission, from here on out. It's a clever ploy and something that directly ties to his own job over in Ethiopia. Now Martian is not particularly happy as he was pulled out of the capital quickly, and he brings his concerns to Frank at the agency. He also sees it as pretty disrespectful that he was just left in a safe house for months in Jordan. There are concerns, especially from those at the top, that he may be a little too emotionally invested here, and as a result he now has a tail on him at all times. A Martian picks up a burner and decides to ring Samir. She's still alive thankfully, and it turns out she's also in London. This is definitely going to complicate matters, and it becomes clear too that he's not going to shake his tail anytime soon. Apparently all of this is just standard procedure until the agency are happy that he's not been compromised. And speaking of compromised, this is probably a good way to segue back to Coyote, who becomes popular knowledge around the agency as he's gone AWOL. The meeting with the big figureheads here, including Owen, for the sole purpose of being chewed out by his superiors I guess, and Martian, takes an uneasy turn when Frank admits that Coyote was a recovering alcoholic and refused training. The worry here is that he may know about various operations, including one in particular called Felix. Now Frank is in trouble for hiding this from the agency, although he believes alcoholism is a disease and he's been trying to help these agents. Henry doesn't see it that way, pointing out the financial implications around everything that's transpired. And before he leaves, Frank tells him to watch out for Martian. The same Martian, I may add, who loses his tail and ditches his tracker so he can be reunited with Samir. It turns out Samir has a husband who's back in the capital, but as the pair talk there's a further twist here. There's a backup tracker on Martian and the tails are closing in on him. For Martian though, he's willing to risk it all for love. During his next briefing with the agency, he speaks to Naomi and mentions Samia. She's a historian by trade, but Martian does lie and claim that he's only known her for 24 hours. The thing is though, she could be in on the game and he doesn't know about it. Naomi brings these concerns to him and points out that if Martian falls in love, this is going to be a problem because love is blind. Episode 2 of The Agency begins in Ukraine with a doctor called Charlie doing what he can to help. Now, working as a doctor is actually his cover and part of the wider picture. It could also be linked to Operation Felix too, and his cover isn't blown, at least not yet, but things are definitely tense. Now meanwhile, Martian and Samia make love, but the former is now suspicious of his lover. He's not sure if she's working against him or not, but when she leaves the hotel, after Martian fruitlessly checks her phone to see the origin of 3 missed calls, his two tails wonder whether Martian may be seeing a hooker. Paul though burns his receipt and heads back to work. Now as Dr. Rachel Blake shows up at the agency, Martian goes over the current Coyote story with Owen and Blair. The assessment here is that he got drunk, blew his cover, and from the police station was taken to a counter-espionage unit. The Belarusian intelligence service managed to get him sober, and then he went AWOL? More than likely he's been killed, but given he was at the agency for 16 months before being deployed, the current worries here is that he may have divulged that amount of info to foreign agents. Different agents out in the field are notified, but one in particular seems to be spooked. This is Alexei Orikov. He manages a trucking company for Russian mercenary groups, and Martian sees an opportunity and decides they should use him as a wooden duck. Now when Martian brings this idea to Henry, the superior wants to talk about the night he spent at the hotel, but Martian cleverly diverts the conversation over to the current operation. He claims he's been training his security detail, hence the theatrics with losing them, but Martian is definitely not done here. Blake shows up with news that she's here to do a psych evaluation on everyone. Martian though takes her into the conference room and shows her the tape of Alexei to assess the situation. Of course, she decides they need to get him out and use him as an asset to try and get Coyote back. Unfortunately, this happens too late. Alexei goes off script and shows up at the airport. It's frantic as the agency work to try and stop him leaving the country while also bringing him in. Now Owen's approach doesn't work, so Blair takes over, causing friction between the two. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen in enough time, as Alexei is taken out of the airport and from a taxi, bundled in the back of a truck. With the men speaking Russian, he's left tied to a chair and interrogated. Of course, all of this is spearheaded by Martian to see if he's been compromised. Alexei isn't in Russia, he's in London, but he's not to know this at all. They grill him pretty hard, making sure he's still playing on their side. According to Martian, this is their game of wooden duck. If he quacks by pushing him through interrogation, then they're in a lot of trouble and he may have been compromised, which would also mean that Coyote could have been compromised too. Alexei reveals himself to be straight, although he divulges critical information in Russian, including supply drops for medical supplies. This immediately puts their team in Ukraine, with the doctors, in the firing line. Charlie, the leader of this group, receives a covert signal and they pack up their things and leave. Unfortunately, Charles and a duo accompanying him find themselves confronted by a Russian roadblock. All the military guards then surround them, and it soon leads to the trio racing out and a gunfight ensuing. Thankfully, the agents manage to make it out in one piece. Now while this is going on, Danny is given her cover and a target she needs to glean information from. Her old life is gone now and her identity shredded. She's going to be thrown in the deep end, with Martian overseeing her deployment. For now though, her target is a Professor Rezem Mortazevi. He runs an exchange program between the London School of Sciences, and he comes to London every 2 years to lecture at the Institute of Geophysics. Danny's job is to be hired and convince him that she'll be joining him in Iran. This is a big ask of course, and she's pretty shocked at how cutthroat this world actually is. As for Martian, he does his intel on Samia and she appears, at least on the surface at least, to be completely legit. They haven't been able to track down her phone details though, as it's encrypted. However, this is also a test, as the man he's hired to get the info does so outside the agency in a dingy, secluded spot. Martian knows how dangerous their job is, and after all, if he's willing to do this for Martian, he could do it for anyone, right? So Martian warns the guy that if he does this again, he'll be fired. However, there are niggling doubts surrounding Sammy's validity, so he decides to investigate further. Martian shows at the college Sammy is enrolled at, but the trouble is she hasn't been since the first day. She's definitely registered there, which would allow UNESCO to validate her visa, but beyond that, it seems she's a ghost. Now as the episode closes out, we cut across to Martian in a hospital room in the future, with a drip narrating how hope can be a dangerous thing. It's clear that something very serious went down, but what might that be? Episode 3 of The Agency begins with Martian sneaking into his bathroom and grabbing his phone from the vents. He wraps it in tinfoil to hide the signal and heads out, intent on losing his tail. It seems to work, as they're too busy arguing about semantics, while Martian makes it to the hotel to meet Sammy. There is obviously distrust on Martian's side, especially after knowing she hasn't shown up at the lectures. In the middle of Sammy talking about dreams and her desires, the phone rings. It's Henry and he demands Martian head downstairs. Now Martian makes up a lie to Sammy that it's his publisher, but given it's nearly midnight, it's unclear if she even bought this. Downstairs, Henry confronts Martian in the hotel lobby. He's concerned, especially as Martian has signed in under his covert agency legend of Paul Lewis. Henry warns that he needs to stop this, and specifically in walking away. Henry doesn't think it's necessary to say goodbye and demands he just up and go. As it's the agency, nothing is personal, and despite the implications of this being seen as suspicious by Sammy, he leaves as instructed all the same. And meanwhile, Blair speaks to Alexei, who's not exactly in the cooperative mood. Given the torturous ordeal he underwent to make sure he's clean, he doesn't really want to work with the agency right now. At the office, Martian is frosty with Henry. The latter tries to play it off by pointing out he also made a personal mistake in the past, but Martian doesn't seem too enthused with the bonding session right now. They head into a meeting and are briefed on the drama that took place in Ukraine last chapter. This directly ties into Operation Felix. It turns out Felix is actually on pause for the time being, and getting back the 3 AWOL agents is of utmost importance. If they're captured by enemies, it could spark a geopolitical disaster. They can't reveal their covert activity, and right now they need to use any means necessary to get the men back. Martian believes infrared may be the way to go, but he's also not done seeing Sammy yet either. She continues to message him on his burner, asking where he is, and later that night, he eventually rings and asks to meet the following afternoon. However, Martian runs into trouble back home. His daughter Poppy has been smoking weed, but while trying to stash her gear, she stumbled upon his hidden wallet and other alias. When she mentions this and calls him out for keeping secrets, Martian silently takes her into the bathroom, runs a shower, and warns her that the apartment is bugged. Given the forceful shaking, Poppy immediately grows spooked and locks herself in her room. And back at the agency, the team have more issues while working through the labyrinth of intel on Ukraine. If Coyote really is rogue, it means what they have on Ukraine is actually corrupt. The gang deduced that if Coyote was to flip, it would be for several reasons: ideology, money, or love. This causes Martian to come up with an idea: look for a single car-sized heat patterns in a radius of 20 kilometers. This is their proverbial needle in the haystack for tracking down the men. The plan is actually a pretty good one, especially as the men continue to evade the IR drones the Russians have out in the wilderness. Given it can track heat signatures, the men hurriedly cool down the engine with water. However, an inbound vehicle to their location sees the resistance arrive. Martian is being watched, as we know, and he attends his therapy sessions intent on just getting through it. However, it's not going to be easy. Dr. Blake tries to understand Martian's mindset, and through some excellent acting from Michael Fassbender here, he goes into detail about what it means to be an agent. Insanity is the core trait here, and after a chilling encounter, he heads off to meet Samia. A brief kiss and a couple of moments of greeting, and is right down to brass tacks. Martian asks about the conference, and Sammy explains that apparently she only signed up to get a grant over in London. She had absolutely no interest in the lectures. With the cover off, Martian presses her for details, asking what she gets up to and trying to broach the truth. However, she turns it around and questions him about his day. This all ends with the pair going their separate ways, and Sammy telling him that this isn't working between them. As fate would have it, their meeting is actually being snapped on camera by a guy called Osman. He picks her up, and as they drive off, she tries not to cry. Episode 4 of The Agency starts in a flash-forward timeline, with Martian still bruised, beaten, and speaking to an unseen woman. This time he gives more context around Sammy and why she's really in London. It turns out she isn't just there for academic work or casual meetings. Instead, she's involved in secret negotiations between Sudanese and Chinese officials, with China acting as a broker in potential peace talks. Martian explains that Sudan is hugely valuable from a geopolitical standpoint, with oil, gold, and access to the Red Sea all in play. Sammy's role is important because she understands the region, the history, and the cost of the conflict better than most. To Martian, she isn't just another contact or an old flame, she's actually someone trying to help end a bloody war. Back in the present, the CIA are dealing with the fallout from Coyote's disappearance. Bosco, Henry, and Martian prepare for a meeting with the Belarusian delegation, hoping to find a way to locate him. However, the situation is already awkward thanks to a congresswoman publicly insulting Belarus, calling them a puppet state and lapdogs of Putin. Henry and Martian are supposed to sit quietly and observe the meeting, but naturally that doesn't last for very long. Henry interjects first, correcting one of the Belarusians, and Martian quickly joins in too. Rather than derail things completely, the pair use the tension to read the room and work out who actually matters in the delegation. They eventually identify the man they need to get close to. Martian approaches him with an invitation to a nightclub in Soho, setting up a less formal meeting where they can hopefully learn more about Coyote's situation. Elsewhere, Danny is dropped properly into her new mission. Naomi briefs her on the Institute of Geophysics and makes clear that she's walking into hostile territory. There's only one place available on the exchange trip to Tehran, and if Danny wants to be chosen, she'll need to stand out quickly. Danny soon meets Reza, who runs the exchange program. Things appear to go well at first, especially when he watches one of her lectures and takes an interest in her. After class, he invites her to a black tie event and asks her to speak about distributed acoustic sensing technology. The only problem is, Danny doesn't actually know enough about the subject to convincingly talk about it. Panicking, she calls Naomi, who comes over to help. Danny insists she can memorize a large chunk of material before the event, but it is an impossible ask, especially under that level of pressure. By the time Reza arrives, Danny is still scrambling to keep up the act. And meanwhile, Martian tries to reconnect with Poppy. The two head out together, and Martian tries to inject a bit of fun into their day by teaching her how to spot and lose a tail. Of course, this isn't just a harmless father-daughter exercise. You see, Osman is following them, although Martian assumes initially the tail must be CIA. Martian manages to shake him, while turning the whole thing into a strange bonding moment with Poppy, but he doesn't yet understand exactly how dangerous this situation is. Osman's involvement is more complicated than it first appears. He isn't simply working for Sammy's husband out of jealousy. He's Sudanese intelligence, and his job is to protect the secrecy of the talks. That means he is watching everything and everyone around Sammy, including Martian. Now, Martian also continues his sessions with Dr. Blake, although he's still hiding key pieces of the truth. She asks him about intimacy and emotional attachment, but he avoids mentioning Sammy. Instead, he claims he can lock his emotions away and bury them when necessary. But Dr. Blake isn't entirely convinced. She notices a scar in his hand and asks about it, but Martian brushes it off with a flimsy story about an avocado pit. Her flashbacks here reveal the real answer. That scar came from his time with Sammy when she was involved in protests against the military and Martian was injured while trying to help her get to safety. Later, Martian meets the Belarusian contact at the Soho nightclub. He uses a stolen bike metaphor to explain what they want, carefully nudging the conversation towards Coyote without making the request too obvious. The meeting gives Martian and Henry a possible route forward, but it also reveals that Henry may have helped engineer the congresswoman's comments in the first place, using political theatre to create an opening. Danny's situation, however, takes a more uncomfortable turn. On the way to the event, Reza begins crossing boundaries with her in the car, touching her neck and thigh. Danny pushes back, saying it isn't a good idea, but Reza turns the situation around on her. He claims she's too nervous to give the speech and tells her to get out. It gets Danny out of a predatory situation, but it also leaves her mission hanging by a thread. If she can't impress Reza, her chances of being picked for Tehran may already be slipping away. Now, as the episode heads towards its ending, Martian arranges to see Sammy at a hotel. However, when he arrives, he spots Osman outside her room and quickly realises something is wrong. Osman doesn't see him, but Martian leaves in a hurry, now trying to work out who the man really is and why he's attached to Sammy. Inside the room, Sammy tries to dismiss Osman, but he turns aggressive. He knows Martian spotted him at the shopping mall and managed to lose him, which tells Osman that this American is not just an ordinary teacher. His job is to keep the negotiations secret, and Martian has now become a problem. Now Osman demands a name, threatening Sammy unless she gives him something. Cornered and frightened, Sammy tells him that the man she's been seeing is called Paul Lewis. It's a dangerous answer though, especially because Paul Lewis is one of Martian's aliases. The episode ends with Sammy compromised, Osman closing in, and Martian's personal life once again threatening to blow apart everything around him. Episode 5 of The Agency begins with Martian questioned over his relationship with Paul Lewis. However, as we know from the previous episode, he's not the only one asking questions, as Osman has him in his crosshairs. For now though, we stick to the agency, where we learn that Langley is putting pressure on them all to try and solve this and get a break on their Coyote case. Martian speaks to Henry and contemplates having someone on the ground to try and gain some extra intel. This falls to Owen, given he was Coyote's handler. He's going to go it alone here and be sent in with the Belarusian authorities to try and protect the intel. Also, he's to leave immediately. Owen makes it to Belarus and immediately checks Coyote's apartment. There's a cat here and a suitcase full of women's clothes. This actually belongs to Coyote's housekeeper, Ava, and she's been hiding out here after a fight with her boyfriend. Interestingly, Owen introduces himself as Jonathan. Meanwhile, Martian heads out that night for dinner with Sammy. There she asks about Poppy, who Martian has introduced as Julia, and the two get talking. However, they're interrupted by Osman, who was apparently just in the neighbourhood and felt like a drink. In reality, he's here to test Paul Lewis. Earlier in the episode, he managed to obtain a file from his contacts detailing parts of Paul's life, but obviously including a lot of blanks, and this is something he intends to try and fill in. Osman tries to rattle him, and when Paul doesn't cave, Sammy shrugs his hostility off, claiming that he's just a colleague that accompanies her to lectures. Those same lectures she doesn't attend. Now Martian immediately has his back up here and wants to know about Osman. However, Sammy refuses to talk about her life because if he knew, she'd be in danger. The Martian drops it for the time being and agrees to go with her to her room. Osman though continues to broach the subject with Sammy the next day. He knows there's something up with Paul Lewis and casts doubts in her mind, especially given Martian claimed his daughter's name was Julia, but she's never met her. And Martian knows that Osman is onto him and decides to hunt the hunter. He follows Osman and Sammy on a bike while also prepping his hotel room to make it look like he's lived by his alias Paul Lewis. Meanwhile, Danny speaks to the professor after refusing his advances, and Razor apologises for what took place between them. She's not going to take any further action, and Danny affirms him by telling the professor that nothing happened. He continues to spin the story though, weaving in that she had a nanny and that's how she can speak some Farsi. Unfortunately, Danny is grabbed in a street and bundled in the back of a car after this encounter. She's questioned about Reza's ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and tied to a chair for a few days. Her kidnapper knows that her passport is fake and threatens to keep Danny hostage for at least 2 weeks. Now, all of this is actually part of her wider training, and while Danny almost cracks by asking if anybody has come for her, Danny passes and doesn't give anything up. She also manages to bag herself a date with her kidnapper too. I mean, Stockholm Syndrome much? Back at the office, Owen receives a call, after sleeping with Ava that night, from HQ. It's Henry. Apparently Coyote has been leaking information at a nearby address, which happens to be one of the dead drops Coyote and Owen used in the past. Whoever is selling the bike seems to be legit, which means that Owen is not safe where he is. He needs to stay put until the dry cleaners arrive, and he's warned that he may well be being watched. Under the hot steam in the bathroom, Owen notices the word Valhalla, so he decides to lock Ava inside the bathroom until help arrives, as you do. While all this is going on, Martian is fully aware that he's in a game of cat and mouse. Osman has the cleaner working at Martian's hotel suite check the room, including the well-positioned manuscript that Paul was working on. Paul intentionally lets himself get jumped too, which is all part of his training and playing into this aforementioned trap. Osman is smart though, and he continues to have Paul followed regardless. In fact, the guy who jumped him, which happens to be Osman's lackey, is tasked with heading into the station and asking about the assault. After all, if someone like Paul was jumped and they spend 1 hour and 40 minutes in a station, surely they've reported them, right? And of course, Paul has not reported it, so it seems like they've caught him out. Even worse, inside Paul's jacket happens to be a card for Poppy. Martian is obviously unaware of all this, and he heads into a meeting with Henry and Owen at the agency, who's back from his little adventure in Minsk. Now, Coyote was seeing a therapist they had no idea about, but the crux of the issue stems from this Valhalla word. Despite all the misfortunes with this case, it does appear as if he stumbled upon a crack in the case. This crack allows Martian to peek inside and starts to understand what they're dealing with here. China is trying to broker a secret deal in Sudan and exert control over an entire region. Anyone who tries to stop the deal are immediately neutralised. Unfortunately, it would appear that Martian is next in their crosshairs as Osman tries to broker a deal to make someone disappear. The only solution here is for Martian to make lies real, otherwise people are going to die. Episode 6 of The Agency begins with a tense surveillance operation as Martian tries to find information tied to a stolen bike. The gist of this is that someone has information on Coyote and appears to be using this stolen bike as a way of sussing out if the buyers are serious or not. Initially, Martian believes that Coyote may be working rogue with this individual, not for an agency. However, he's convinced that they can't ignore this bid and need to play the game in order to get what they need. And at the same time, Jim Richardson shows up at the agency and asks about Kensington. With the Chinese brokering a peace deal in Sudan, Jim is not particularly happy when he finds out they already know about this. A Martian shows too and realises all of this is a play for a promotion, and he's not happy with Jim trying to play him. Things are getting tense, and that's especially prevalent when Martian does some digging and has an educated hunch that the bidder could be a man named Novikov. He's a retired KGB general going under the alias of the Octopus. The dead drops and breadcrumb trail all feel like old school methods, and Martian is convinced this is the right play. When Novikov hangs up on him without a word, Martian decides to play along and make the bid. They manage to broker a deal, and the game is afoot. And meanwhile, Sammy is watched constantly, and she ends up with a security detail to protect her. She sees through this and knows that they're here to keep a close eye on her. However, it also means that she's not going to be able to see Paul without others around. In the middle of this, Danny continues to hone her skills before heading out into the field. Naomi warns about the implications of a romantic relationship, especially with a fellow spook in Edward. She's about to ship out to Iraq and needs to avoid emotional entanglement. Danny shrugs it off though and quips about multiple sailors in different ports. At that night, while under the alias of Paul Lewis, Martian holds up at the hotel and receives a call from Sammy. She brings up that she's basically under house arrest right now, and the pair talk. At least for the night anyway. In the morning, Paul slips away from his tail and heads back to the agency, as they set up a meet with Novikov. Unfortunately, he didn't bank on Osman tailing Poppy and bringing up Paul Lewis. It rattles Poppy, who hurriedly walks away, unaware of how much danger she's actually in. Of course, this coincides with Martian's mission, as he has to go dark but similarly evade the men that Osman has tailing him. As a result of this, Paul ends up late for his meeting and realises there's a tracker on him too. He ditches a tracker, which comes from a business card, but being late like this isn't a good look. Even worse, Poppy rings and brings up Osman is after her. He has Poppy phone her mum and head there for the time being, while Martian, whose facade is starting to slip, shows up to his meeting sweating and flustered. And Novikov is selling information about Coyote, who's staying alive for the next 4 to 5 days, but Novikov is the go-between here. Or, as he so aptly puts it, the compass. He wants information surrounding the Vogelsang barracks north of Berlin, and the CIA made recordings and he wants the tapes. A Martian gets this approved from his superiors, but while they wait, Novikov warns that this game isn't worth it, and Martian should probably leave before everything burns. He's already feeling the pressure of the personal and professional colliding, of course, and that's occurring sooner rather than later. With the recording confirmed, we find out the true tragic tale surrounding Coyote. Turns out this agent was depressed and spiralling out of control. He messed up, recruiting someone connected to Russian mercenaries who got his psychiatrist to mess about with his pill prescription, and Coyote didn't spot it. He was drugged and taken to the police, where a corrupt agent called Bogdan was waiting for him. There, Coyote was taken out via the underground tunnels that linked to the government buildings, past the mercenaries for the sum of 20k. This means, unfortunately, that the Russians have him. Unfortunately, their commander, General Volchok, is in charge of Valhalla, and this also explains the Valhalla word written inside the shower in Coyote's apartment. Now, Coyote is going to be a sacrificial lamb here, and he's behind enemy lines in Ukraine. The handover with the FSB takes place in a week's time, and if they want him back, they need to be quick, otherwise he'll be gone completely. Now, while this is going on, Sammy slips away from her tail and heads out. Osman is not happy and hurries to catch up, but Sammy heads to Paul's apartment and tries to find him, but of course he's not there. He's at the office, phoning Poppy, who doesn't give anything up, but for now knows that his daughter is safe. A big meeting with Langley then goes ahead, and of course, given the implications of having Coyote sing and reveal all, it could completely change the landscape of the war here. Martian believes they can still get him back, but they have 4 days to do so. However, him promising to get Coyote back also has big implications, and as everything crumbles around him, Martian finds himself struggling. Something is about to go drastically wrong, so the only way to get around this is to lie bigger and fly higher. Unfortunately, Osman phones that night and brings up Martian's ties with Poppy, knowing that he's getting closer. Episode 7 of The Agency begins with Sammy threatened with her family's lives if she decides to step outside and visit Paul again. She rings Martian shakily and lets him know that she's not safe. Martian promises to try and work this out, but it's clear the noose is tightening around both their necks. It doesn't help either that things are estranged at home with Poppy, whom Martian tells to stay inside for the time being. Naturally, Poppy does what any teenager would do and heads out anyway. Unfortunately, she's followed, but thankfully an agent is on hand, at the request of Martian, who snatches her up and helps evade Beijing's surveillance team. At the agency, we find out more about this Operation Valhalla. General Volchok is the one fronting this squadron, and he's been in collusion with specialised soldiers, forming this mercenary group. Now, these guys carry out various secret operations around the world. They offer their services to whoever pays most, with areas of conflict involving Syria, Libya and Iraq. Valhalla has been blamed for numerous war crimes, but they're a tricky group to nail, given they have numerous troops across the world. They're also an incredibly paranoid bunch, killing anyone who stands in their way or any sign of dissension in their ranks. According to Henry, they do so with sledgehammers, so cracking this nut is not going to be easy. Not only is it going to be difficult to take them out, there's also the legal headache too. Given units of Valhalla are registered in different foreign countries, they can't nail an official link with Russia, meaning any covert operation could well be a death sentence. The Martian is working on an asset they can deploy and throw behind enemy lines, but it's almost like a suicide mission at this point. The poor guy who's going to be thrown into the lion's den? Yep, it's Alexei. He doesn't exactly have a choice here, as the alternative is a rather nasty trip to Belarus. This is the same man, if you remember, who was tested and tortured earlier in the series. Henry brings Martian into his office while Alexei is making his decision. He notices Poppy in the hallway after being grabbed and is forced to answer some tough questions with Henry. He manages to navigate this minefield, bringing up the current deal going down with Eric Huang and Sedan. In fact, he makes a play and decides they should recruit Sammy to their cause. Just before he goes, he hugs Poppy but whispers new intel to corroborate his own story about Sammy. However, even with this, Dr. Blake has her reservations. She questions Naomi about Martian's ties with Sammy and deduces that he may still have feelings for her, which we know he does. In the midst of all this, Danny finds out she's not going to Iran, as Reza has actually asked for another researcher to go in her stead. Never one to back down, and needing to do whatever she can for the mission, Danny has Edward threaten to hurt the researcher and his family unless he plays ball and not go. After, Danny messages Edward and decides to go for plan B, given the researcher hasn't taken the message. Elsewhere, Naomi speaks to Henry and has her doubts, thanks to Dr. Blake, about Martian being the one to bring Sammy in. She has a gut feeling that he may have been compromised to love, so Henry tells her to get concrete proof if this actually is the case. Unfortunately, she may have just a ticket, given all the old interviews between the two, one of which discussing the possibility of Martian and Sammy getting in a relationship together outside of the organisation. This plan to grab Sammy, dubbed a jack-in-the-box grift, is to send a message over to Samia, claiming her visa has been revoked because she's skipping classes. Osman reads the email and demands Sammy fix this, allowing her to go to the college. This means she's taken the bait. A Martian speaks to Poppy outside back home, telling her all of this was just a fire drill and they're safe now. He's still lying even now to keep his family safe, but how much longer can he do this? In Belarus, Alexei is grabbed and taken to General Volchok. He brings up that Volchok is being messed about by his trucking company, who overcharge by the region of 25% on every invoice from the general. Volchok is incredulous over this news and threatens him. Alexei is put on the spot here, with the general not sure if the man can actually be trusted or not. He's bemused over how Alexei is able to sit there and withstand such intimidation, given most men crumble under this level of scrutiny. In private, Volchok has done his homework and checks out the credentials of Alexei. The general doesn't believe him, given the way he initially stood up to him, and believes the man is working with the CIA. As the episode comes to a close, Sammy arrives at a college where Martian is waiting for her, ready to reveal everything. Episode 8 of The Agency starts with Martian revealing the truth about who he is to Samia. He reveals that he's a spy working for the CIA and makes it clear she was never a target. However, Samia obviously doesn't take it well and his plan completely backfires. When Sammy leaves, she speaks to Osmond but keeps his cover in check, at least for now, because of her affection for him. When Henry finds out about Martian's sideways mission, he tries to smooth things over, but Bosco laments how far off the ball they are here. In Belarus, Sylvia is approached at the salon and recruited to the cause. They need something they can use to wiretap the general, and that comes from his boots. Blake is concerned for the woman's livelihood, given she could well be in danger if she's spotted. But the CIA are ready to use her as collateral damage as long as they get the intel they need. Elsewhere, Danny prepares for her next mission, but there's a problem. She's not very efficient at her job, given Reza has asked another assistant to go in her stead, Sora. Danny decides they should go out and celebrate together, but while there they do drugs and party the night away. Now, this does serve a purpose because Danny's role here, to head off with Reza, is the #1 priority. However, Danny is muddying the waters and breaking all the rules and getting close to her targets. Alongside Naomi, the horror of her role soon comes to fruition. She joins Danny as they head off into the field, speaking to Sora's mother and trying to recruit her to head off to a care home. The idea here, as Naomi alludes to back in the car, is to get a Swiss doctor to essentially kill her. And Naomi's quick to lay down the law about how there are 2 circles, one for friends and one for targets, and Danny needs to make sure these don't cross. Back home, Martian accidentally walks in on Poppy and her new fella, Daniel. They're both naked and he's pretty nonchalant to the whole endeavour. He speaks to Poppy outside a little while later and catches her off guard by claiming she's growing up to be a pretty cool person. Still reeling from the revelation about Martian, Sammy tries to hold it together as she heads into the tenuous secret meeting about the future of Sudan and China. However, in the middle of the meeting, she just collapses on the floor. Osmond is concerned and, in fact, it's here she reveals everything. She brings up the truth about who Paul is and how he tried to recruit her. Osmond decides to take drastic measures, and in fact, he's carting her off on the next flight to Khartoum. Osmond takes his news to Guo and Delago too, and warns they need to move their operation ASAP. At the same time, Sylvia goes ahead and switches to boots, although she's a shaky, nervous wreck the entire time that she does. Richardson, as it turns out, is actually working alongside Guo and the Chinese as a double agent. They meet at a gallery and exchange intel. And while they scheme, Naomi heads back to the office and speaks to Martian. She's concerned that this whole operation is going to blow up in their faces. Given what's happening with Danny, she knows that Martian is way too close to all of this and he can't see what's right in front of him. She also knows that the timings don't add up when he initially ran the ideas for Samia. Make the right call, she eventually says, when he pulls seniority on her and ends the meeting abruptly. Through all of this, Martian shows up at the meet spot agreed by Samia. However, it's not Sammy who arrives, it's Guo. He claims to be representing her and calls out their leaky intel, bargaining for a change of plans. To sweeten the deal, he also has a USB stick with details around 2 Russian agents working in the US Energy Department. Intel, it's worth noting, that was given by Richardson earlier in the episode. Meanwhile, the general finds out about Sylvia's betrayal and takes her out back and shoots her. However, he does so while having her wear the wiretapped boots too, just to add insult to injury. Unfortunately, this also causes the general to decide to go after Coyote and make a move, promising to broaden his horizons after their little trip together. A Martian speaks to Guo in the car park in the midst of all this, and unfortunately their chat soon turns violent. He's ready to kill for Samir, and after choking Guo out, races to the airport. He makes his play, doing everything he can for Samir as they talk in private, offering her the chance to find out who he really is. Unfortunately, Sammy doesn't go for it, and she walks away. Episode 9 of The Agency begins with Coyote being moved by the General. Unfortunately, when the CIA find out in Washington, they are not happy. As time is against them, they need to make it work. So Martian bluffs the CIA director, spouting on about crystal balls and a high-tech op, but in reality, he's just playing for time. Speaking of which, Martian happens to have a note reading, "Pull check your phone." And is this a message from Sammy? Well, Martian checks out the phone first and finds a video of Samir behind bars back home. Osmond puts her life in Martian's hands, promising that she can either live or die based on his actions. It definitely rattles him, as everything around this guy starts to crumble and fall apart. As for what Osmond wants, he's after a list of everyone Martian recruited in Addis Ababa, and he has 48 hours to deliver it. Back in the office, Martian reminds everyone that they have 4 hours to try and get Coyote back from the General. But how? Where do they start? Danny is briefed by Naomi, who reminds her that you never drop the cover no matter what. She's caught off guard for a Spanish alias with local knowledge and is reminded to be on the ball 24/7. Danny miraculously passes the test and manages to get herself a ticket across to Iran. Interestingly, Reza has his own cover, coming in the form of Azar. She's there to make sure there aren't any problems, and specifically sets out to test Danny to make sure she's legit. It's incredibly lucky, to be honest, especially off the back of what Naomi told her, and she manages to get the go-ahead for her operation. As the gang check through Volchok's intel, they find a guy that could be a weak link here. This is Leo Kravitsky, former chauffeur and chef, who's going nowhere under Volchok's rule. He's a little resentful regarding his lack of career opportunities, so naturally the agency play on this, pretending that he's going to lead a brand new team. However, it's all going to stay between them with men they trust. One of those men happens to be Martian himself, who shows up and hands over money in exchange for a bunch of names to Leo. He corners the guy and forces him to play ball, and it seems to do the trick as Martian gets a dead drop from Leo at his place that night, which includes the intel he's after. The intel includes a secret itinerary for the Deputy Defense Minister of Russia, including where he's visiting on the front lines in Ukraine. Martian makes a play on his own to use this intel to bring in the Felix team to create a kill box for him. Despite Henry chewing him out, the operation is given a green light. The operation is racked in tension, and before everything is put into action, Martian brings in as many of the trusted agents as they can to try and find any weaknesses to the operation. The idea here is to put pressure on Leo, so he directs Volchok to the kill zone. The Ukrainians on the ground have now been redeployed to assist a rescue team, who will be on standby to spring the trap, get Coyote back, and get the hell out of there. As the episode closes out, Danny prepares to head out to Iran, while Martian is conflicted over how he's going to handle the Samir situation. He ignores a call from Osman, who messages and tells him, "You just killed her." Episode 10 of The Agency starts with Martian on his way into the agency. However, there seems to be a problem. Owen rings and reveals that a team are in place, but they've reported much greater numbers than before on the ground, making a rescue that much more difficult than it was. Martian decides to move the kill zone up 300 meters, but before he can continue this line of thinking, a car comes crashing in from the side and knocks Martian off his motorcycle and to the ground. We then cut back to earlier in the day. Everybody at the agency is on guard and preparing for the most stressful day, as the op to get Coyote back is well underway. Naomi is angsty about Danny's operation too, as she's now flown out to Iran. Whilst there, Danny is questioned by the authorities, who begin taking her things apart and trying to make her crack. Eventually she's released, but all that training has certainly paid off. Henry has received word from the Horn of Africa while all this is going on, as Samir is being kept in Kobo prison, which is, as Martian himself puts it, an absolute hellhole. The thing is, there's no political leverage at the agency for her, so it's not even like they can bring in undercover agents or try to bargain for Samir to leave. Instead, Martian heads out and speaks to Talaga, the African ambassador. He offers up British passports and other rewards in exchange for Samir's life and freedom. However, all of this is being watched by James Richardson. He has his new lackey, Robin Shaw, plan their next move, intending to see just how far Martian is willing to go to get his beloved back. Speaking to Richardson, Martian offers up Dalaga, but that's not what the man wants. He wants Martian to become a double agent. Now this would mean he needs to betray his own country, but conversely he'd be able to get Samir out. With no other choice, he says yes, but Richardson decides to leave it for now, not sure whether he can trust the guy or not. Now in the basement of the agency, Owen is brought in to oversee the operation to get Coyote back. He's not quite sure what to do, so he rings Martian, and this is where the opening scene comes into play. And Martian is rushed to hospital after the accident, where we learn he's dislocated his shoulder, has broken his arm and 2 ribs, along with sporting a bleed in the brain too. Naomi heads to the hospital and waits, but in reality this is all a ruse. Turns out he just has a few cuts and bruises, along with being knocked out. Richardson is there and he questions Martian in private, and it turns out he was the one who hit him on the road and intended to do so he could question him alone without distraction. This is where all those interview scenes come from throughout the season, and why he so desperately needs to keep his cool. Now back at the agency, Owen takes Martian's advice and moves to kill zone for the operation. What he didn't bank on was one of the Ukrainians smuggling a gun in, prepared to take out Defense Minister Chekhov while sacrificing himself too. One of the Felix team does end up shot, but it's absolute anarchy. The Felix team decide to kill the Russians, taking their comrade on a helicopter and then leaving a grenade on board and blowing it sky high. The convoy eventually hit the kill zone and the team move in and attack. The operation is a success and they manage to get Coyote back. Among the deceased happens to be the general, while the Felix team make it out in one piece as well. Well, 2 of them anyway. Now at the hospital, Poppy and Naomi show and are there to greet Martian when he wakes up. However, this isn't the end of it. We know that Martian is now going to be operating as a double agent, having passed Richardson's test and needing to get Samir out. All you have to do is keep a secret, he says, setting up season 2 as Martian heads back to work with the intent on getting himself some big promotions along the way. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.